Hey guys, welcome back to more Karen neighbor stories. What would you do if an entitled neighbor cut down all trees on your property just because they ruined his panorama view? Let's dive right into the video. And the title story is titled, Entitled Neighbor Cut Down All Trees on My Property. So I always assumed living in the mountains would be kind of a peaceful and simple life, thinking of old shows like Little House on the Prairie or something like that. It was nice until my neighbor decided that the view was a lot more important than a ton of trees older than anybody we know. So the land I live on was inherited from my grandparents and I always loved nature, so it was an easy decision to move in rather than sell it like a lot of people might do. One thing about my property is that it had 26 beautiful large evergreen trees that were easily 100 years old. I felt like they were part of the beauty of everything. Plus, here in the mountains, the trees really help cut down on erosion of the land. I was living here for about 4 years in peace until a big house went up and a very arrogant man moved in. I could tell right away that he was different from most of the people that lived here. Despite the large land, everybody else had moderately sized homes. He created a mansion on the property with giant glass windows that seemed more like glass walls to me in certain spots. He mentioned to people wanting to have the best view from his house. I will give him this. The view here can be amazing. The sunrise, the sunset and the stars that don't have the light pollution of a city blocking them from view. The sun peeking out from my trees and the fresh air just made me feel like I was living in somewhat of a paradise. My new neighbor didn't see the same beauty in the same things that I did. He also clearly didn't understand the idea of a simple life and simple pleasures. He complained about how he didn't have a bunch of things like he did in the city, namely a lot of restaurants and better connections for the phone and internet. He also was a big bragger and talked about how much money he had, talking to anybody that got stuck near him about how he made millions in the stock market and that was how he could afford to build such a big house, telling people that maybe they should make more money and expand on their houses. And well guys, that is amazing financial advice. Yeah, just make more money. Then you can also afford such a villa. Anyway, missing the picture by a mile about why people enjoy living up here, things got bad when he started hinting, and I used that in quotes since the man didn't know the word subtle, that I should cut down my trees. The hints were basically demands that came with the complaint that my trees were ruining his view, talking about how he couldn't see anything aside from my trees, which blocked everything. I want to say two things, the first being that my trees were not blocking a view the way he was describing it. He made it seem like the trees were against his house or something and he couldn't see anything else. What he meant was that in addition to everything else, he saw my trees and didn't like it. Two is that nothing was wrong with the trees, they were not dead, they were not in danger of falling over or any other valid argument to ask me to get rid of a tree. Neighbor, you should really just cut them down already. You don't realize how much money you spent getting the house built, all to be ruined by your useless trees. Me, I do know because you never stop telling people. Also, they are not useless. They are my trees. I want them and that's the end of it. Neighbor, nothing is the end of it unless I'm the one that says it. You don't have a clue about my connections. Me, no, but I know the rules around here. Healthy trees cannot be cut down without a homeowner's approval. Neighbor, rules don't really apply to people like me, it's about who you know. I'm above the law out here with the friends I know, and whatever I want happens. He left and I had a bad feeling about what might happen, but no recourse to take without him making the first move. That came with him making complaints about me to the town, claiming the trees were diseased and a fire hazard. People came, saw they were alive, made a note of that, and left. I also asked for a copy of that report. I was going to document everything, and it started with that report. It also included him threatening to sue me for blocking his view. Something I knew, and I'm sure he knew as well, is not a damn crime. He really did believe that he was above the rules and law. In addition to the documenting everything, I made my boundaries clear with him, telling him multiple times that I was not gonna get rid of my trees. Again, it was met with him telling me that he could do what he wanted and I couldn't get in his way. Looking back, maybe I could have taken action at this point, I just wouldn't know how. Harassment? Maybe. This went on for the better part of the year, by the way. I'm just giving the cliff notes so it doesn't go on forever. I left town to visit some family and while I was gone, the neighbor hired a company to cut down and remove all 26 of the evergreen trees. He didn't pay for the stump removal removal either, so I came home to a land filled with stumps where the trees used to be. All of which I took photos of course. I could also see that now his house had a magical clear view of the horizon, not a single tree in his view at all. It also gave him a view right from his house into mine, which was eerie. When I confronted him about it, he didn't even lie. He was smug about it and admitted that he did it, claiming it looks better now and I should thank him. Also giving me advice to get rid of the stumps because they were kind of ugly. There were many effects from him doing this very stupid thing. We are warned often that without the trees, the slope could become unstable. Even the next bad rainstorm was washing some soil downhill. The thing is, the trees existed to prevent that. There was also legal action being taken against him, because if he thought I would sit on my thumbs after he did that, he was mistaken. I called everybody on this guy I could think of. I called the sheriff, I called the forestry service, and I called a lawyer who had some experience in tree law. The criminal side of things moved faster than I expected. Within a few weeks, the sheriff's department had filed charges against him for criminal mischief and destruction of property. They also went after the tree removal company for operating without proper permits and removing trees from the property they had no authorization to touch. So the criminal case took about 6 months to resolve, and my neighbor ended up pleading guilty to avoid jail time and paid substantial fines. I heard it was around $50,000 in total between the criminal fines and the court costs. The tree company also got hit with fines and had their business license suspended for a few months. While that was happening, I was working on the civil suit for damages. I was able to get an expert to come out and give me an estimate of how much the trees were worth. This was just the base trees. They also assessed how much the cost would be to stabilize the slope and damage to the wildlife habitat. For the trees alone, it was worth $495,000. It might sound like a lot, but they don't just value the tree, they take everything into account, even the environmental function. The civil case took over a year to resolve, since he came with a big shot lawyer, but it didn't do any good since I had the actual law on my side. That report I had showing that all my trees were healthy was a big help to go against his claims that my trees were a hazard. Also, the pictures of stumps showing the exact number he cut down helped. Basically, he did the hard work for me and I was $500,000 richer for it. What made things even worse for him was that cutting down the trees created a serious safety issue. Trees did get replanted, but they were gonna take a long time to prevent erosion. Other methods were gonna need to be taken for safety. Since his property is closer to the danger zone than mine is for a potential landslide, his property needed some major changes. Emergency retaining walls were needed for multiple houses. His home needed larger ones because of the large house and where it was. These walls ruined his view, and now it looks like constant construction is taking place in his yard. Instead of dealing with a few trees, he was now dealing with basically no view that he wanted and can only see this industrial stuff. After both the criminal case and civil lawsuit were finished, he really didn't speak to me anymore and even installed blinds to where he could see me from his property and kept them closed at all times. I knew somehow in his mind he considered this my fault, maybe because I told instead of letting a landslide happen and the entire hill and everybody living on it to collapse and die. With the money he gave me, I'm not quite sure what to do with all of it. Replanting the trees didn't take all of the money. I made sure to get my own smaller retaining wall for safety too. Still, that leaves me with a lot of extra cash. I know that between what he gave me in the civil settlement and what he had to pay in criminal fines and having to help pay for the erosion walls, he lost a ton of money. I take more pleasure in the fact that he did all of this because he didn't want anything to block his view. And now his view is just dirt mounds, construction machinery for a while, and a concrete retaining wall. I mean, maybe it can come down in a few decades when the trees mature enough. And yeah guys, this person learned that you should never mess with nature, because what you get in return is an ugly construction site. And by the way, if you've enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. The next one is an amazing malicious compliance neighbor story that is titled, "Can I remove the charge?" Well, I will just use it then. So in the early 2000s, when I first moved out on my own, I rented from a complex that charged you for assigned parking. It was an upcharge of $25 a month. If you didn't get assigned parking, you would have to fight for a space on the street. My apartment was in the back of the complex and I was getting over a recent knee and ankle injury, so I opted for paid parking that was relatively close to my front door. My car was a junker 3 years older than I am, but it ran semi-okay and the heater worked. As a newly minted adult, I was happy to have it. About 3 months into my lease, my car went to the great scrap heap in the sky. I had gotten used to the local transit system and discovered a nearby store would drop off groceries for me. This was long before Walmart and other stores started doing it, so it was cheaper than figuring a month's supplies on the bus. So I opted not to replace the car and utilize the bus pass my work reimbursed me for. I went to my leasing office and told them I no longer needed the space and would you please remove the extra charge from my bill. The manager at the desk was new and had never been asked that before. She promised to look into it and let me know. I was naive and figured it would be gone come next month. But nope, it was still there. I paid all but the parking space and called up the complex, the same girl. She said she was awaiting word from higher ups and offered me a credit for the charge as a one-time courtesy. I reminded her that I no longer owned a car. I hadn't just changed my mind. I told her that the space had been empty for close to a month now and that I won't be utilizing it. She said she understood loud and clear and would get it sorted by next month. Well, 3 days before rent was due, she finally got back to me. Apparently, it was in my lease and couldn't be removed without breaking the lease and signing a new one. Even if I didn't move out, the lease breaking and initiation fees would be charged to me and my rent would go up to the new current market value. This would be over $1,000, so not an option for someone freshly on their own, so I kept the parking space on the lease. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing my lease to get the phone number for maintenance and noticed a clause for the parking space. Essentially, I could park a motorcycle, scooter such as a Vespa, car, truck, SUV or trailer in the space. Gears were turning. For me to be in compliance, I had to have wheels on anything parked in my space. So I went to my local version of Craigslist and found a wheeled container similar to a shipping container. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every cent. The complex offered storage sheds at an upcharge too. Being fresh out of high school, I didn't have much to store. My neighbor though did. I threw a lock on the unit and offered it to my neighbor for half the cost of a shed. $35 a month. He was able to move his stuff out of his storage unit, where he was paying over $100 a month, and the container was available 24/7, 365 days a year. He was happy for the arrangement and paid several months in advance. The complex put several tow stickers for out of compliance on the trailer, but I called the tow company and faxed them a copy of the lease where it says trailers are allowed. The container was registered with the county as a utility trailer, so there's nothing they could do. They tried to fine me for improper parking, but again, I had proof I was within my rights and they even offered to remove the charge for parking on my lease if I would relocate the container. With what my neighbor was paying, I could cover my water bill every month, so I declined. I stayed 18 months and sold the trailer to my neighbor when I moved out. He had to rent a car to relocate it to his assigned space, but he said it was worth the couple hundred he paid. He ended up saving over $1,000 a year renting from me. Other neighbors even started bringing in their own containers too, even if it meant getting a second space. Sheds were being vacated at such a large volume, the complex tried to give them away at 6 months free. Few took them up on it. The complex amended the new leases to exclude trailers, but could do nothing about those that already had them in the spot, and instead of moving out and giving notice, renters would be reassigned their lease to new people so they could be grandfathered into the trailer clause. I drove by the facility 2 years or so after I moved out, going to a friend for Thanksgiving. Well, now the complex had been sold to a new owner and changed their name, but wouldn't you know, there were still about a dozen wheeled shipping containers parked in the lot. Added, as there's some confusion and people are fighting, the trailer was small. Think of 4 dog kennels in a 2x2 configuration. You could fit a table and chairs in there, but you would scape the ceiling. It was in rough shape. This was back when the dollar store, not Dollar Tree, sold spray paint and I took care of repainting it myself. I negotiated drop-off to the complex from the seller, and with the spray painted delivery, I think I was out like $700. Keep in mind, this is not a massive 40-foot trailer picture I posted a few times as a reference. It's that style of trailer. Registering the trailer was super duper cheap, like around $30 and possibly even less. When I sold it to my neighbor, I got $300 or so for it. Yes, I took a loss, but without a car, I didn't want it, and he approached me first when he found out I was moving. There were a number of colleges and universities near where I rented. Most leases banned subleasing, but lease changeovers were commonplace. You go to the complex and tell management, I'm done renting here, but but instead of breaking the lease, my friend is gonna do the rest of my term. So you usually did not get the deposit back as it stayed with the new renter, but you did not pay an exorbitant pay-a-lease break fine either. It also kept the apartment seamlessly occupied without tenant gaps, which most places needed. If they sold the trailer to the next guy or to their neighbor, I'm uncertain. I was not privy to those decisions. All I know is 2 years later, they were no longer XYZZ Complex, but under a different name, and a dozen or so trailers still remained. As for the 18-month I stayed, 1 year in a lease, 6 months at a month-to-month, in my state, addendums to leases require you to enter into a new leasing term, and that was not gonna happen. IDR if they charged a month-to-month fee if I didn't renew my lease, as it was close to 20 years ago. I've been month-to-month for 3 years at the place I've been living for 4, some places charge one, some don't. Rent can still go up, but changes to the lease that are substantial cannot take place unless I sign a new lease agreement. I've had to look up laws and advocate for myself a lot because of BS like this. The tow company was mom and pop, and they were not predatory, and I knew that multiple illegal tows could get their license pulled. The minute that first tow sign went up, I was practically shoving my paperwork down their face. No way that could play the ignorance card after that. They still exist to this day and now have multiple locations. In fact, they are the assigned tower for my current complex too, ironically. Finally though, storage sheds or units are required by my state to be month to month. It's a state law that goes back to at least the 1980s, and I've had to memorize a lot of laws regarding storage for my job. So the apartment couldn't force anyone to keep their shed, so my neighbor cancelled at the end of his next month. Great guy. Lived in a 3-bed with a set of twins, 1 boy, 1 girl. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So this incident happened in January of this year. Last year I moved into a neighborhood with an optional HOA. At the time, I had come into enough money to buy a house outright. The only reason I moved here is because the HOA was optional and it's a nice, safe neighborhood. It's a slice of heaven compared to where I used to live. I own 2 vehicles, a 2004 Toyota Camry and a 1999 Ford F-150. The Camry is my daily driver, while the F-150 is my hauler for when I need it. I bought the truck around the same time I bought the house to help with the move, and I used it to pull a rented trailer when I was moving my stuff in. The F-150 is old but in good mechanical order, and I try to keep both of my vehicles clean with monthly trips through a car wash. The local HOA didn't like me from the start due to my refusal to join. The HOA president was a retired old man who seemed like he had nothing better to do. So he tried multiple times to sell me on joining and sent me several applications in the mail. But I always declined, politely at first, but when the president got more aggressive, I told him to shove it where the sun doesn't shine. That is when the HOA decided that I was a member anyway, and started sending me fines in the mail with that claim. I knew they were bogus, so I went to the next HOA meeting to dispute the fines. They tried to tell me that by living here, I am in the HOA automatically whether I liked it or not. This was an obvious power move and something I was ready for. I could only laugh in amazement of their stupidity and said as much to them. Then told the board that not only was I not a member, but I'd gotten a lawyer to write up a C&D for them. I handed the envelope over, the board skimmed it and then furiously told me to get out. The fines stopped for a few months and then started right back up again at random. So I popped into another HOA meeting and told them this was not legal and I'm not in their HOA and I would take them to court if they didn't stop this. And once again I was furiously told to get out. The fines stopped for good, but the HOA president decided I needed to be made an example of. It happened only a few days later. I came home to find my F-150 gone from my driveway. I checked my cameras and saw the HOA president himself walk onto my property. He basically took out a pocket knife and stabbed each of my truck's tires in the sidewalls and then unscrewed the license plates off, put them in a bag and just casually walked away with them. Then, a little while later, a tow truck came and hauled my truck away. I called the police and together we went to see the HOA president, but he was not home. With my situation explained, this was not considered a civil matter, but actually grand theft auto. The police traced the tow truck as being from a local junkyard and not from an impound lot. I accompanied the police there. Not only was the HOA president present at the junkyard, but my F-150 was there, being taken apart by about 4 men. They had already removed the headlights, hood, bumper, radiator and all of the panels off the front of the truck by the time we had gotten there. There was stuff disconnected all over the engine bay and the catalytic converters had already been cut out. The HOA president looked like a deer in headlights when he saw me there with police. I was nearly angry beyond words when I saw my truck in that condition, nearly I say, because I went off like a foul-mouthed country sailor on the people who had ripped my truck apart. The HOA president was caught red-handed but insisted he had only towed my truck because it was in a sorry state and looked abandoned. I said he illegally took it off my private property since the HOA had no right to tow it off my land and he clearly had not been aware of my cameras as they had seen everything he did. He went pale at first and then furiously tried to stomp towards me, looking like he was ready for a fight while yelling my truck had been an eyesore, so he got rid of it. This action earned him some new bracelets and a free ride to the station. The police were somewhat merciful to the junkyard staff who claimed to have only been doing their jobs. The owner of the junkyard is a cousin to the HOA president, so then he was contracted to do any towing for the HOA since he also owned a local impound. He had no idea that I was not a member of the HOA and also was not aware his cousin had ordered his employees to tear my truck apart for parts as an abandoned vehicle. The police cited all sorts of broken laws to the employees and owner, and then they agreed to put my truck back together. But I said that it had better be at least as good as it was, if not better, or I would be going to my lawyer. The owner told his employees to do whatever it takes, or he would separate them from their jobs. Then told me he would bill the HOA president for everything later. Then the police and I got to watch as all of those employees had to painstakingly put my truck back together piece by piece. And they repeatedly muttered things about me to each other and flashed me the stink eye from time to time. I'm guessing the HOA president offered to bribe them all to take my truck apart as quickly as possible. But now they had to fix it for free and they were at it for hours. They had to weld the catalytic converters back in and even had to replace some parts entirely due to damage caused during hasty disassembly. When they first fired up the engine, it had an obvious misfire. They denied it, but police sided with me that they could tell it had a misfire too. Turns out they ruined one of the coil packs taking the truck apart and they had to order new parts from a nearby auto parts store to fix it. One of the headlights also stopped working. Again, something that they had to fix because I stated I could prove with my home cameras that they were both working when I last drove it, and the bulbs were nearly brand new LEDs, so they had to have broken something there too. The coolant lines had also been just cut instead of simply disconnected, probably because they were trying to take the truck apart in a hurry. So those were more parts that had to be ordered from the nearby store as well. I can only imagine the total cost that was billed to the HOA president for this. All 4 of the tires had to be replaced because they were not repairable. So then they had to leave the truck on a lift and take all 4 wheels off. There were other problems too, and all of these junkyard mechanics had to work overtime to put the truck back together on the hopes that I would not sue or press charges. I was not even able to take the truck home till the next day evening because the police had to get my plates back and the junkyard staff had to take the wheels in for new tires. By the time I got the truck back, the 2 junkyard employees I saw there gave me looks that just said not to come back. And the truck actually runs better than before, so I essentially got a free sort of overhaul for my trouble. As for the HOA president, and well, I did sue him for trespassing, theft, destruction of property and the illegal tow. He ended up paying his cousin for all of my truck repairs, lost his position in the HOA and moved out of the neighborhood shortly after, losing the lawsuit because he had no leg to stand on in court since everything was caught on CCTV. He pretty much surrendered to the asked for settlement, which is why it did not get drawn out. The HOA hasn't bothered me at all since the truck incident. Also, my neighbors love me for getting rid of the old HOA president, as he was a power-tripping narcissist to them all and kept issuing pointless fines that had to be regularly disputed. Also, I've been back to that junkyard for parts, but for my Camry instead, as I went to pull a replacement grille for it and found one in excellent shape there. They did recognize me and of course gave me dirty looks, but otherwise did not bother me. Update to the story: some months ago I wrote about how the volunteer HOA in my neighborhood tried to force me to join and then told me I was a member whether I liked it or not. I only moved here because the HOA was explicitly stated to be voluntary only, but that was just to lure people in. Once here, the HOA would try to act like you're a member and then demand you pay them. This is what they tried with me, but I confronted them in their own meetings twice about it. The first time I gave them a C&D, and the second time it was an all-out threat to sue. That is when the board finally took me seriously, but the HOA president had a serious chip on his shoulder and couldn't let it go, so he vandalized my truck and had it taken away to a junkyard. So anyway, now that you're up to date, here's what happened. The HOA board decided to wait until the next election to replace the president, but until then the HOA itself were still the power-tripping fat cats they were before, just a man short. They were leaving me alone though. But the other people in the neighborhood not so much. I was not the only one in the neighborhood not legally signed onto the so-called volunteer HOA, and the others who were being forced to pay despite lack of membership followed my example and stopped all payment and then threatened to sue. There was some blowback from the board, like them saying that having paid anything to the HOA made them members. They countered with asking where the application they had signed were. Of course there weren't any, the board was losing power and finally made it obvious how much they hated it. Finally though, the board elections were coming and the board basically pleaded with the neighborhood in various ways that things don't change aside from a new president being elected. There was strong suspicion these people were lining their own pockets with HOA money, so they were given an option of surrender. They refused and tried to keep their positions, but were all voted out. They didn't leave the board willingly, as they demanded an open recount of the ballots, which showed that almost nobody voted for them. So they claimed the votes had been rigged against them and demanded a redo vote with a different system. Someone pointed out that they were just stalling for time by saying the voters cheated somehow, and then someone suggested a majority vote by hand raising at the meeting, and that showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the old fat cats were voted out. I heard they chastised everyone that they would destroy the neighborhood as they packed their stuff and left. The newly elected board and president then filed a motion to dissolve the volunteer HOA entirely. And the old fat cats were some of the only ones who voted against it. There were also a few older residents who also tried to vote against it, but the majority more than had it enough. The motion passed and the volunteer HOA was shut down. There was no investigation for embezzlement though. However, my neighbors did not seem to care to get one started now that the HOA was disbanded. Personally, I would have moved forward with one, but I was not an HOA member, just a guy with popcorn on the sidelines. Since the disbandment around 2 months ago, at least 3 of the houses in the neighborhood have already been repainted in colors previously not approved. One of the former board members had put his house up for sale, and the fat cats have gotten a little slimmer, if you get my meaning. The house that had been rented out for the HOA office building was also sold to a new family that moved in. Just about everyone here is so much happier, except the fat cats and their very few supporters. The most power they have left is to yell at people to get off their lawns now. And they seem to spend the bulk of their time either hiding at home or at their wine club. And yes, I found out that they have a wine club, it really didn't surprise me much. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I'm very happy with this outcome of this HOA story for OP. And of course for the entire neighborhood. It's always good to see these power-hungry tyrants being removed from their positions. Seriously, there are few things as satisfying as seeing an HOA getting dismantled. Then again guys, I'm curious, have you ever dealt with homeowner associations yourself? And if so, how has been your experience? Was it positive or negative? By the way, a little update here from my side. I've told you guys like months before that we had an HOA meeting in the neighborhood because apparently Thai people are now also interested in HOAs, and it has been a few months now, and also there has been another meeting recently, but to be honest, there have been a few issues in the neighborhood, such as people not really taking care of the dogs constantly barking, some people parking exceptionally stupid, but in true Thailand fashion, of course also the HOA is not really enforcing their rules at all. I suppose for better or worse. And before we end the video, let's read one last funny story from r/prorevenge. So this one is titled "Old Lady Got the Ticket Instead." This was taking place at my apartment about 21 years ago. I was 24 back then and was living in an 18 apartment building. Probably made of cardboard and paper because the soundproofing was awful. I had this old lady and her husband as a next door neighbor. Once in a while she would call the cops on me for noise disturbance while I was listening to music or watching a movie, and each and every time the cops arrived they were forced to admit that my volume was not high enough for an actual complaint, but they still asked me if I could turn it down a little. This happened a good dozen times before I got pissed and asked the policemen if they were allowed to ticket someone for repeatedly bothering them for nothing. They didn't really answer, but I could tell that it was making them think a lot. That was the last time I saw the police at my door from that old witch. Weeks later the janitor told me she told them that she got a huge fine for bothering the police with false accusations. Justice served. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.